On the morning of August 12, 1843, a woman's scream tore through the quiet of Willowbrook Plantation in South Carolina's Low Country. What Catherine Hargrove saw in her husband's private quarters that day would ignite a scandal so shocking that newspapers refused to publish the details for 60 years. Within 3 days, over 300 townspeople gathered in Beaufort Square to witness a punishment so horrific that many carried its memory to their graves. The county sealed all records until 1923, and when historians finally examined them, they found a truth far darker than any rumor. This story was not just about betrayal. It was about the total destruction of a man's soul, orchestrated by the one person who knew how to wield an entire community's fury. Before we continue with the story of Willowbrook Plantation and the scandal that ruined the Hargrove family, do this if the story is already sending chills down your spine. Subscribe now. We explore the darkest true stories from America's past, the ones deliberately hidden from history. Comment with the state you're listening from. Are you near where this nightmare unfolded? Subscribe, because what comes next is far worse. Now let's return to 1843, to a world where reputation meant everything, and losing it meant losing one's existence. Beaufort, South Carolina, in the early 1840s, was full of contradictions. Spanish moss hung from ancient oaks like funeral shrouds, beautiful yet suffocating. The air carried the scent of salt marshes and magnolia blossoms, sweet but unable to mask the underlying decay. This was a place where fortunes rose from fields tended by enslaved labor, and white, columned mansions competed to display wealth and power. The Hargroves stood at the top of this society. Edmund Hargrove, 35 in 1843, had inherited Willowbrook Plantation 7 years earlier, 3,000 acres of prime land, and a Greek Revival mansion completed in 1838. Crystal chandeliers imported from France hung above heart. Pine floors so perfectly joined the seams were invisible. Edmund embodied the ideal South Carolina gentleman, tall, dark-haired, broad-shouldered from years of riding. He dressed impeccably, spoke with the measured cadence of old money, served on the town council, and was a church deacon. He was regarded as a fair master, which meant he whipped his slaves less frequently than neighbors. Yet Edmund harbored a secret that would unravel everything. Catherine Hargrove, Nene Catherine Peaton, had married Edmund in 1837. She came from Charleston, with wealth to rival the Hargroves. Their marriage, arranged to strengthen both families, adhered to society's expectations. Catherine was beautiful in the prescribed Southern manner, pale skin shielded from the sun, dark hair perfectly styled, waist cinched to fashionable narrowness. She had been educated at Charleston's finest academy, trained in French, piano, watercolors, and the subtle art of managing a household while appearing idle. Their wedding had been the season's social event, attended by 400 guests at St. Michael's Church. Everyone said they were the perfect couple, destined for beautiful children. But 6 years in, there were none. Whispers filled parlors, a mix of pity and judgment aimed at women who failed in their primary duty. Catherine felt their weight, saw Edmund's mother's thinly veiled disappointment, and understood her value diminished with each passing year. What she did not know was why there were no children, why Edmund came to her bed so rarely, why he seemed distant even when present. The truth lay in the quarters behind the main house. Names carried it: Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel. Marcus, 24, son of the head cook, light-skinned with hints of mixed ancestry, had worked in the house since age 15, first as a footman, then as Edmund's personal valet. Intelligent and perceptive, he moved like a shadow, anticipating needs before they were spoken. Samuel, 26, worked in the stables, darker and muscular from labor, skilled with both horses and leather. He carried a quiet dignity, an inner strength slavery could not break. Edmund had noticed him 3 years prior, finding reasons to visit the stables more often. Daniel, 21, a carpenter, crafted detailed woodwork for the house. Slight and delicate, with long fingers and an artist's eye, he spoke rarely, his voice soft and careful. He had learned early that invisibility ensured survival. Edmund was careful. He met them separately, never together, always at night in the East Wing, where Catherine never ventured. That wing, supposedly under renovation and unused, became his sanctuary, a room with its own garden entrance, simple yet comfortable furnishings, a large bed, heavy curtains, a lock, and oil lamps casting soft, forgiving light. For 3 years this secret continued. Publicly, Edmund maintained his perfect persona. Church every Sunday, business conducted with ruthless efficiency, smiles shared across dinner tables with his wife. Yet late at night, while Catherine slept in her separate bedroom as was proper, Edmund would descend the servant stairs. He crossed the darkened gardens to the east wing, where one or more of the three men waited. These men had no choice, they were property. When summoned by their master, they came. Desire, fear, resignation, or some mixture of all three, none of it mattered. Survival required compliance. Refusal meant punishment, sale, or separation from family. So they came when called, kept silent, and reminded themselves that at least they were spared the backbreaking work of the fields, that at least their food and clothing were marginally better, that small privileges from Edmund came in exchange for their silence and their bodies. Yet even the most carefully guarded secrets eventually surface. In a house where dozens of enslaved people moved through shadows, where wives listened for creaking floorboards at night, and where jealousies and resentments simmered beneath every interaction, a secret this large could only remain hidden for so long. Catherine had begun to notice, first small things, Edmund always locking the east wing door, him appearing unusually energized on some mornings, almost cheerful after weeks of distant moodiness, Marcus moving through the house with a tense gait, eyes never meeting hers, Samuel lingering in the garden late at night, when he should have been in the quarters, Daniel occasionally showing bruises on his neck, marks that might have been from fingers or lips. She had seen these signs and pushed them away. The alternative was unthinkable. No Southern gentleman could behave in such a way, impossible, unnatural, against nature, against every law of civilized society. But Catherine was not a fool. Raised in a world where women learned to observe, to read the subtle signs men thought hidden, she had learned patience. 6 years as a wife to an increasingly distant husband, enduring pitying looks and whispered judgments, feeling her worth diminish with each childless year, slowly. Like water seeping through cracks in a foundation, the truth had begun to penetrate her carefully maintained denial. On the night of August 11, 1843, Catherine made a decision she would know the truth. Whatever it was, however terrible, she would see it with her own eyes. She waited until the house was dark and still, then listened for Edmund's footsteps in the hallway as he descended the servants' stairs. She gave him 10 minutes, enough time to reach the east wing, to settle in, to believe himself safe. Then she rose from her bed, wrapped a dark shawl around her white nightgown, and followed. The garden was lit only by a quarter moon and the faint glow from the slave quarters. Catherine moved carefully, bare feet silent on brick paths. Cicadas chirped in the trees, the distant river whispered, and her heart pounded so hard, she feared it would wake the entire plantation. She reached the east wing. The side door was slightly ajar. Light flickered from within, casting shifting shadows. Catherine approached slowly, breath shallow, hands trembling. Peering through the gap in the door, she saw a room larger than expected, furnished with care that revealed this was no temporary arrangement. The bed dominated the space, covered in fine linens she recognized as missing from the household inventory. Oil lamps cast warm light across the scene. Edmund lay on the bed, unclothed, entwined with 3 others. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were with him, moving together in ways that left no doubt about what was happening. The sounds, the intimacy, the practiced familiarity of their movements, all spoke to a relationship ongoing and comfortable. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the scream rising in her throat. She froze, unable to look away, unable to process what she was seeing. Her husband, the respectable planter, church deacon, pillar of society, engaging in acts both illegal and considered the deepest depravity. In 1843 South Carolina, what she witnessed was a crime punishable by death, not just for Edmund but for Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel as well. The law made no distinction, offered no mercy. The act was called sodomy, a word rarely spoken aloud, considered an abomination so terrible that even mentioning it could corrupt the decent. Catherine watched, perhaps for 30 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. She saw Edmund kiss Marcus with a tenderness he had never shown her. She watched Samuel's hands move across Edmund's back with familiarity. She saw Daniel whisper something that made Edmund laugh, a genuine, unguarded laugh she had not heard in years. In that moment, seeing her husband display more authentic emotion and desire with 3 enslaved men than he ever had with her, something cold and hard crystallized in her chest. Betrayal, yes. Humiliation, yes. But above all, rage, pure, focused, calculating rage. She had given him 6 years of her life, endured whispers and judgment, diminished herself, and tried to be the perfect wife. All the while, he had been here in this room with these men, living his true life, while she lived a lie. Catherine backed away from the door, her mind already racing. She returned to the house, climbed the stairs to her room, and sat at her writing desk. Her hands were steady now, her breathing calm. She lit a candle and drew out paper. She wrote 3 letters, one to Edmund's mother, one to Sheriff Charles Dunor, and one to Edmund himself. In each, she described what she had witnessed, omitting nothing necessary to convey the full horror. She sealed all 3 letters, then walked to Edmund's door and slid his letter beneath it. Returning to her room, she lay on the bed fully dressed and waited for sunrise. Edmund found the letter at dawn. He picked it up, broke the seal, and read. The color drained from his face. His hands began to shake. He read it 3 times as if repetition might alter the words. Catherine had seen him. She knew everything. And she had already written to the sheriff and to his mother. His first instinct was panic, to run, saddle a horse, ride north, disappear. But where would he go? He was a plantation owner whose entire identity was bound to this land. He possessed no skills beyond managing enslaved labor and maintaining social standing. Without Willowbrook, without the Hargrove name, he was nothing. His second instinct was denial. Perhaps he could convince Catherine she had misunderstood. But even as the thought formed, he knew it was desperate and foolish. Her letter described details that proved beyond doubt she had witnessed exactly what she claimed. His third instinct was rage. How dare she threaten him? But the rage faded quickly because Edmund knew the truth. He had betrayed her, lived a lie, and in the rigid moral universe of the antebellum South, what he had done was unforgivable. He walked to Catherine's bedroom and knocked. No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. He knocked again, harder. Catherine, we must talk. Please. Her voice came from behind the door, calm and cold. There is nothing to discuss, Edmund. The letters have been sent. Sheriff Dunor will arrive within the hour. Your mother shortly after. I suggest you use whatever time remains to make peace with God, because you will have no peace in this world. Edmund pressed his forehead against the door. Please, Catherine. I can explain. Explain how you spent 3 years defiling yourself and your slaves. Explain how you made a mockery of our marriage and our name. There is no explanation that matters, Edmund. You are a sodomite. That is what you are. That is all you are, and everyone will know it by sunset. Sheriff Dunor arrived at 30 with 2 deputies. Catherine met them at the door, still dressed in her nightclothes. She invited them inside, offered coffee, and explained the situation in the calm, measured tone of a woman reporting a property dispute. The sheriff was a large man, 60 years old, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen every variety of human wickedness. He had known Edmund since childhood, attended his wedding, and been a guest at Christmas gatherings. As he listened to Catherine's account and read her detailed statement, his expression darkened, betrayal mixed with disgust, then settled into the cold resolve of a man who knew exactly what the law required. These are serious charges, Mrs. Hargrove, the most serious a man can face in this state. I am aware, Sheriff. That is why I sent for you immediately. My husband is in his study. The 3 slaves are in the quarters. I want them all arrested. I want this handled to the full extent of the law. The sheriff nodded slowly. Where did this occur? The East Wing. There is a room furnished for this purpose. You will find everything exactly as I described. Sheriff Dunor motioned to his deputies. They moved through the house with Catherine leading. She showed them the East Wing, the side door, the room itself. The bed was unmade, the lamps still burning low. Evidence was everywhere, impossible to deny. The sheriff's jaw tightened. This was a violation not just of law, but of the entire social order. Edmund Hargrove was one of the wealthiest men in the county, a respected citizen, a community leader. And now he would have to be destroyed publicly and completely, because allowing such behavior to go unpunished would threaten the very foundations of their society. "Arrest Mr. Hargrove," the sheriff ordered. "Bring him to the town jail. Then go to the quarters and arrest the 3 slaves, Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel." The deputies entered the study. Edmund did not resist. He stood, set down his glass, and held out his wrists for the shackles. His face was blank, emptied of expression. As they led him down the hallway, he looked once at Catherine. She met his gaze without flinching. "I hope you understand what you have done," Edmund said quietly. "This will destroy you as much as it destroys me." Catherine smiled, a cold, terrible smile. "I know exactly what I have done. I have revealed you for what you are. I will survive this, Edmund. I will return to Charleston, to my family. I will be the wronged wife, the innocent victim of your depravity. But you will be nothing. Just a name whispered, a cautionary tale, a warning about the consequences of unnatural vice." Edmund said nothing more. The deputies led him outside to a waiting wagon. Within minutes, he was on his way to Beaufort Town Jail, shackled like a common criminal. His fall from grace was so sudden and complete it felt unreal. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were dragged from the quarters in chains. Their families watched in silent horror, knowing their loved ones were entangled in something that would almost certainly end in death. In 1843 South Carolina, enslaved people had no legal defense against such accusations. If a white man claimed they had participated in sodomy, guilt was presumed. By noon, all 4 men were locked in separate cells. By evening, everyone in Beaufort knew. The news spread like wildfire, whispered in shops and parlors, spoken in horrified tones over dinner tables, argued in taverns. Edmund Hargrove, the respectable planter, had been caught committing sodomy with 3 male slaves. His wife had discovered him and reported him to the law. The scandal eclipsed every other concern. Nothing else mattered but this single, terrible revelation. The week between Edmund's arrest and his trial felt suspended in time, as though all of Beaufort was holding its breath. The town had never seen scandal of this magnitude. They had known murder, theft, adultery, drunkenness, and violence. Every familiar sin had passed through the courthouse. But this was different. This reached something deeper and more frightening, a violation so profound it threatened the very order of their world. Judge Howard Middleton presided over Beaufort County's legal proceedings. 68 years old, a veteran of the War of 1812, he was known for strict interpretation of the law and an unwavering commitment to social order. When the documents related to Edmund's arrest were delivered, he sat alone in chambers for more than an hour, reading and rereading the charges. He had known Edmund since childhood, signed his marriage license, approved loans for Willowbrook's expansion. Now he was being asked to oversee Edmund's destruction. The law was explicit. South Carolina statutes defined sodomy as an abominable crime against nature, punishable by death or by such lesser penalty as the court deemed appropriate. Though the statute strongly implied death was preferred, there was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. If the act was proven, the harshest punishment was expected, yet complications remained. Edmund was white, wealthy, and descended from a founding family. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were enslaved, property valued at perhaps $800 each. In theory, the law applied equally. In practice, everyone understood that enslaved people would be punished more quickly and more severely. The real question was how to punish Edmund without creating a precedent that might endanger other wealthy white men with secrets they wished to keep buried. On August 15th, Judge Middleton convened a private meeting. Present were Sheriff Dunor, County Prosecutor Richard Fellows, 3 prominent citizens including the mayor, and 2 church deacons. Catherine was not invited, nor was anyone representing Edmund. "Gentlemen," the judge began, "we face a situation that requires both justice and discretion. The charges against Mr. Hargrove are supported by unimpeachable evidence. His wife witnessed the crime directly. Physical evidence corroborates her testimony. If this were any other man, any man of lesser standing, we would proceed to conviction and sentencing without hesitation. But this is not any other man." Mayor Thomas Pritchard spoke up. "It is Edmund Hargrove. His family has been part of this community for 3 generations. His plantation employs hundreds directly and indirectly. If we execute him, what becomes of his slaves, his property, his debts, and the debts owed to him. Prosecutor Fellows, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, shook his head. With respect, Mayor, we cannot allow wealth or status to interfere with justice. If we treat Mr. Hargrove differently than a poor farmer or shopkeeper, we undermine the very foundation of the law. A crime is a crime, regardless of who commits it. Fellows is right, Sheriff Dunor added. I have the man in my jail, along with the 3 slaves who participated. If we allow anyone to escape justice, what message does that send? That the wealthy may do as they please. That the law applies only to common folk. Reverend Samuel Cartwright spoke next, his voice heavy with moral certainty. This is not merely a legal matter, gentlemen. It is a spiritual crisis. What Mr. Hargrove has done is an abomination before God. It corrupts the natural order and threatens the moral foundation of our society. If we show mercy, if we soften the punishment, we suggest such behavior is forgivable. We cannot do that. We must not. Judge Middleton nodded slowly. Then let me propose a course of action. We will hold a trial. Given the circumstances, conviction is certain. But I will exercise discretion in sentencing. Mr. Hargrove will not be executed. The room erupted in protest, several men speaking at once. The judge raised his hand for silence. Hear me out. Death would be a mercy for a man in his position, a quick end, a closed coffin, a private burial. His family could mourn and move on. No. What I propose is worse than death, a public punishment of such severity that Edmund Hargrove will wish we had hanged him. Destroy not just his body, but his soul, his reputation, his very identity. Make the entire community witness it, so everyone understands exactly what happens to men who commit this crime. What form will this punishment take? The prosecutor asked. Judge Middleton's expression was cold, as he considered the pillory and whipping post in the town square, not for an hour or 2, but for 3 full days, locked in the pillory from dawn to dusk, exposed to the elements, to insects, to the jeers and curses of anyone who passes, he said. And at noon each day, a public whipping. Not enough to kill, but enough to leave permanent scars. Enough that for the rest of his life, he carries marks of shame on his body. The room fell silent. Even the men who had insisted on harsh punishment seemed taken aback by the brutality of the plan. And the slaves? Reverend Cartwright asked quietly. They will be hanged, the judge said without hesitation. They are property who corrupted their master, seduced him into depravity. They will serve as an example of what happens when slaves step beyond their place. Executions will precede Mr. Hargrove's punishment by 1 day, so he knows the cost of his actions. Sheriff Dunor frowned. That is not just, Your Honor. By all accounts, Hargrove initiated these relationships. The slaves had no choice. They could not refuse their master. Justice and necessity are not always aligned. The judge replied. The law requires that all participants in sodomy be punished. More importantly, white citizens need to see the natural order restored. White men may fall, but they fall from great height. Slaves who participate in such acts must be eliminated entirely. Harsh, yes, but the only way to maintain control. The men exchanged glances. Slowly, reluctantly, they nodded in agreement. The solution satisfied no one completely, but it balanced the demands of law, social hierarchy, and the need to make an example that would resonate far beyond Beaufort. But Judge Middleton had not factored in Catherine Hargrove. Though absent, she had sources. Young Benjamin Porter, courting Catherine's cousin, had overheard the discussion and relayed it to his fiancée, who immediately informed Catherine. When she learned the plan, she was not satisfied. She had wanted Edmund destroyed, but she had not anticipated Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel being executed. Despite her rage, she recognized that the 3 men had been trapped in an impossible situation. They were property, compelled to obey their master. Executing them for Edmund's depravity would be a miscarriage of justice, even by the twisted standards of slave society. Yet Catherine understood something else. If Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel died before Edmund's public punishment, if they were hanged and buried before the town while witnessing Edmund's humiliation, he could become a martyr. People might whisper he had loved his slaves, that he had sacrificed himself for them, that there was something tragic or even romantic in his fall. Catherine could not allow that narrative. She sent word to Judge Middleton requesting a private meeting. curious about what a woman at the center of scandal could want. He agreed. They met in his chambers 2 days before the trial. Catherine arrived dressed in full mourning black, a deliberate choice, a visual representation of death, her marriage, her hopes, her future. She sat across from the judge with perfect posture, hands folded, expression calm. Your Honor, I have heard of your intended sentence for my husband and the 3 slaves involved in his crime. The judge raised an eyebrow. That was a private discussion, Mrs. Hargrove. How did you come to know of it? In a town this size, very little remains private. But I am not here to question your authority or judgment. I am here to make a request. Speak then. I request that the punishment of all 4 men occur simultaneously. That Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel not be hanged separately, but be present during Edmund's 3 days in the pillory and whipping. That they witness what becomes of the man who used them, and that Edmund, in turn, be forced to watch their executions on the final day, after his punishment is complete. The judge leaned back, studying her. That is remarkably cruel, Mrs. Hargrove, even for a wronged wife. My husband showed me no mercy, Your Honor. Showed our marriage no respect. Showed God's law no reverence. Why should I show him mercy now? Why should he be granted the dignity of being punished alone, where he can imagine himself the victim? Let him see what his desires have caused. Let him watch those 3 men die, knowing his actions brought them to the gallows. Let the entire town witness the full consequences of his depravity. Judge Middleton was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your request is granted. I will modify the sentence accordingly. The trial will proceed in 3 days. Punishment will begin the day after the verdict. It will be exactly as you described. Catherine stood, smoothed her black skirts, and offered the judge a small, cold smile. Thank you, Your Honor. Justice should be complete. The entire story should be told. Nothing should be hidden. The trial began on August 18, 1843. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. People stood in aisles, crowded doorways, pressed against windows, trying to hear every word. This was not merely a trial, it was the social event of the decade. The courtroom became a spectacle that would be discussed and debated for years. Edmund was brought in wearing shackles. He had not been allowed to change clothes since his arrest. His once fine shirt was stained and wrinkled, his face gaunt, eyes hollow. He looked like a man already dead inside, moving through the motions of life because he had no other choice. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were brought separately, also in chains, forced to stand in the corner of the courtroom, guarded by armed deputies. Their faces betrayed different emotions. Marcus appeared resigned, almost peaceful, as if he had accepted his fate. Samuel's jaw was set, eyes burning with quiet rage. Daniel trembled, tears streaming silently down his face. Judge Middleton took his seat. The prosecutor rose and presented the charges. Then Catherine was called to testify. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high. Dressed in dark gray, still mourning colors, though slightly softened from the mourning black she had worn previously. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. In a clear, steady voice, she recounted in exacting detail what she had witnessed on the morning of August 12th. The courtroom was utterly silent as she spoke. Men shifted uncomfortably. Women fanned themselves, whether from heat or shock. No one could tell. Every word Catherine uttered struck like a hammer, shattering Edmund's reputation, dignity, and very humanity. When she finished, the prosecutor asked, Mrs. Hargrove, is there any possibility you misunderstood what you saw? No, sir. No possibility of misunderstanding. What I witnessed was clear, unmistakable, and deliberate. My husband was engaged in acts of sodomy with 3 male slaves. He was not coerced, not confused. He participated willingly and enthusiastically in acts that violate every law of God and man. Young William Crawford, Edmund's defense attorney and clearly wishing he had not been assigned the case, stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Hargrove, is it possible your husband's behavior was the result of temporary insanity? That he was not in his right mind? Catherine's eyes narrowed. My husband has engaged in this behavior for at least 3 years, Mr. Crawford. That is not temporary insanity. That is deliberate choice. That is who he is. Crawford asked a few more questions, but each only deepened Edmund's predicament. Finally, he sat down defeated. The evidence was overwhelming. The witness was unshakable. Edmund was asked if he wished to testify. He shook his head. What could he say? The truth was undeniable. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were not allowed to testify. The law offered enslaved people no voice, except in rare, specific circumstances, none of which applied here. Their guilt was assumed based on Catherine's testimony and physical evidence. They could only stand silently in the corner, awaiting the inevitable. Judge Middleton addressed the jury, though everyone knew their decision was predetermined. Gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the testimony and seen the evidence. The law is clear. Sodomy is a crime of the highest order, an abomination that threatens the moral fabric of our society. You must now determine whether the accused are guilty of this crime. The jury deliberated less than 10 minutes. When they returned, the foreman delivered the verdict. We find defendant Edmund Hargrove guilty of sodomy. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Some voices expressed satisfaction. Others sounded shocked, even though the outcome had been expected. We find the slaves Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel guilty of sodomy and of corrupting their master. The declaration was quieter, almost an afterthought. The three men's fates had never been in question. The jury simply made it official. Judge Middleton nodded. Court accepts the verdict. We will proceed to sentencing. He paused, letting the tension build. Every person leaned forward, waiting for the decree. Edmund Hargrove, you have been found guilty of the abominable crime of sodomy. The law permits me to sentence you to death, and many believe that would be appropriate. However, I believe death would be too merciful. You have violated not just the law, but the sacred trust of your position. You have corrupted your slaves, abused authority, and brought shame upon your family and community. Edmund closed his eyes, bracing for what would come next. Therefore, I sentence you to 3 days of public punishment. You will be locked in the pillory in the town square from dawn to dusk each day. At noon, you will receive 20 lashes. You will carry the permanent marks of your crime upon your body for the rest of your life, and you will witness the execution of the 3 slaves whose lives you destroyed with your unnatural desires. A gasp swept through the courtroom. 3 days in the pillory was brutal enough, but 60 lashes in total would leave a man scarred and broken. Forcing Edmund to watch the executions was psychological torment many deemed excessive, even given the severity of the crime. As for Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel, the judge continued, turning toward the 3 enslaved men, you are sentenced to death by hanging. The execution will take place in the town square on the afternoon of the 3rd day of Edmund Hargrove's punishment, so that he may witness the consequences of the corruption he brought upon you. Daniel collapsed. Deputies caught him before he hit the floor, holding him upright as his tears ran freely. Samuel's face remained impassive, but his hands clenched into tight fists. Marcus looked directly at Edmund for the first time since the trial began. His expression was neither anger nor fear. It was something colder, sharper, pity. Judge Middleton struck the gavel. This court is adjourned. Sentence will be carried out beginning tomorrow at dawn. May God have mercy on all your souls. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as people filed out. Some were satisfied that justice had been served. Others were disturbed by the severity of the punishment. Many were already planning to attend the public spectacle, drawn by morbid curiosity and the promise of witnessing something unprecedented in Beaufort. Catherine left without glancing at Edmund. She had achieved her goal. The truth was public, and Edmund was destroyed. Soon she would be free to leave, never to return. Morning arrived too quickly. The sun rose over Beaufort, casting golden light across the town square. Crowds were already gathering chairs set up for prominent citizens, while others stood in clusters, whispering quietly. Children were kept at home, but teenagers and adults packed the square until movement was difficult. In the center stood the pillory, a wooden frame with holes for head and hands, and beside it the whipping post, a thick wooden pole with iron rings for securing the condemned. Both had been freshly painted, as if someone wanted them to look their best for this historic occasion. At dawn, Edmund was brought from jail. He wore only trousers, bare-chested, feet without shoes, hands bound behind his back. Deputies led him to the pillory, locking him in position, head and hands secured, body bent forward, completely immobilized. The morning sun was already hot, Within an hour, Edmund was sweating. Within 2, flies had discovered him. Within 3, his back burned from sun exposure, legs trembling from the strain of standing still. The crowd watched. Some jeered and shouted insults. Others stared silently. A few felt pity but kept it hidden, knowing sympathy for a sodomite could taint their own reputations. Catherine arrived mid-morning, accompanied by 2 female relatives from Charleston who had come to support her. She stood at a distance from the pillory, not close enough to speak, but visible enough that Edmund could see her. She wanted him to know she was present, witnessing his complete humiliation. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel had been brought from jail and chained together at the edge of the square, guarded by deputies. Their reactions differed. Marcus remained neutral, revealing nothing. Samuel watched with grim satisfaction, relishing the sight of the man who had used him now suffering. Daniel could not bear to look, keeping his eyes fixed on the ground. At noon, the real punishment began. Sheriff Dunor approached the pillory with a long leather whip. The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. Edmund Hargrove. The sheriff announced, voice carrying across the square, "You have been sentenced to 20 lashes. May this punishment serve as a reminder of the consequences of your crime and a warning to any man who might be tempted to follow your path." Edmund's body tensed. He had been whipped once as a child, lightly, for minor mischief. This was nothing like that. He braced himself, but there was no preparation possible. The first lash struck without warning, the leather biting across his bare back with a crack that echoed through the square. Edmund gasped, but did not cry out. A thin line of red appeared immediately. The second lash followed, then the third. By the 5th, he was groaning with each blow. By the 10th, he cried out uncontrollably. By the 15th, he was sobbing, body trembling with each strike. Blood ran down his back, soaking the waistband of his trousers. The 20th lash fell. Edmund sagged in the pillory, held upright only by the wooden frame that imprisoned him. The crowd was silent now. The initial thrill of witnessing punishment had faded, replaced by the uncomfortable reality of watching a human being broken. Sheriff Dunor coiled his whip and stepped back. Edmund would remain in the pillory until sunset, still exposed, still suffering. He drifted in and out of consciousness as the afternoon stretched endlessly. People came and went, some staying for hours, others briefly glimpsing the spectacle. As the sun approached the horizon, the sheriff returned, unlocking the pillory. Edmund collapsed immediately, barely able to stand. Deputies caught him and dragged him back to jail, where a doctor had been ordered to examine him and ensure he would survive the next 2 days. The second day began just like the first. Edmund was brought out at dawn, locked in the pillory, exposed to the sun, insects, and the jeers of the crowd. His back was a mass of scabbed lacerations, every movement pulling at the wounds and sending fresh waves of pain through his body. Catherine returned as she had the day before. She stood in her black dress, face shaded by a parasol, expression unreadable. Whispers followed her through the crowd. Some called her cruel, others vindictive, but all understood the depth of her rage. She had been wronged in ways few women could ever imagine. At noon, the whipping began again. 20 lashes tore across Edmund's already raw back. This time, there was no dignity left, no strength to maintain composure. He screamed from the first blow, begging and pleading for mercy that would not come. The law had decreed 20 lashes, and 20 he received. When it was over, his back looked like raw meat. The doctor would later remark he had never seen a man survive such punishment, but survive he did, though there were moments when he wished he had not. The third day arrived. Edmund was brought to the pillory for the final time. His body was barely recognizable, back wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, face swollen from sunburn and insect bites, legs trembling under the weight of his own frame. The sentence was clear: 3 days in the pillory, 3 sessions of whipping. The law would be fulfilled. The crowd that day was the largest yet. Word had spread throughout the county, and people had traveled from neighboring towns to witness the conclusion of Edmund Hargrove's punishment and the execution of the 3 enslaved men. The square was so packed that deputies had to form a perimeter to prevent the crowd from pressing too close to the pillory and the gallows, which had been erected overnight. The gallows were simple, but effective, a wooden platform with 3 nooses hanging from a crossbeam, positioned so that Edmund, locked in the pillory, would have a clear view of the executions. This was Catherine's final gift to her husband, the knowledge that his desires had directly caused these men's deaths, and the obligation to watch. The final 20 lashes came at noon. Edmund barely reacted this time. He was beyond screaming, beyond pleading. He simply endured, his body jerking with each impact, blood flowing freely from reopened wounds. When the whipping ended, he hung limply in the pillory, more dead than alive, but still conscious. That was important. The doctor had been instructed to keep him alive and aware, so he could witness what came next. At 20:00 p.m., Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were brought from the jail. Chains clanked with every step as they walked through the silent crowd. The men climbed the steps to the gallows platform, where Reverend Cartwright stood, Bible in hand, attempting final prayers. Daniel interrupted him. "Save your prayers, Reverend." Voice steady despite fear. "We do not need God to bless what he allowed. If there is a God who sees this and does nothing, then he is no God at all." Reverend Cartwright recoiled. "You blaspheme in your final moments?" he asked. "I speak truth in my final moments," Daniel replied. Something no one else in Beaufort seemed capable of doing. Samuel spoke next, his voice carrying to the crowd. "You call us criminals, you call us corruptors. But we never had a choice. When our master called, we obeyed. That is what slaves do. We survive however we can, and now you kill us to protect your own sense of order. Remember that? Remember what you did here today." Marcus said nothing. He looked at Edmund, still locked in the pillory 20 feet away. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, a final acknowledgement of the strange and terrible bond they had shared. The executioner, John Kelly, placed the nooses around each man's neck, adjusting them carefully before stepping back. Judge Middleton, standing at the base of the gallows, checked his pocket watch. At exactly 20:15, he nodded. The executioner pulled the lever. The trapdoors beneath Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel opened simultaneously. 3 bodies dropped, necks snapped with audible cracks that carried across the silent square. They died quickly, perhaps the only mercy afforded them. Their bodies swung gently in the afternoon breeze. 3 men who had been property in life and remained so in death. Edmund watched it all. He saw Marcus die, Samuel die, Daniel die. Something inside him shattered in a way no physical punishment could reach. A low, wailing cry escaped him, originating deep in a soul already broken. The sound of anguish, despair, and guilt would haunt all who heard it for the rest of their lives. The bodies were left hanging for an hour, as custom dictated, to ensure death was complete and serve as a final warning. Then they were cut down and loaded into a wagon, destined for unmarked graves on the edge of town, in the section reserved for criminals and slaves who died unclaimed. At sunset, Edmund was finally released from the pillory. He collapsed immediately and had to be carried back to jail. The doctor examined him, confirming he would survive, though the recovery would be long and excruciating. That evening, Judge Middleton visited Edmund's cell. He looked down at the broken man, barely conscious, wrapped in bandages, spirit as shattered as his body. "Mr. Harrove," the judge said, "you have served your sentence. You are free to go. But understand this, you are no longer welcome in Beaufort, nor anywhere in South Carolina. If you remain, if you attempt to reclaim your property or your position, society will close its doors to you forever. My advice," someone said, "is to leave, go west, go north, anywhere but here, and pray that no one in your path ever learns your name or your history." Edmund said nothing. There was nothing left to say. His life, as he had known it, was over. Everything he had been, everything he had built, was gone. He was a ghost now, a living reminder of what happens to men who violate the unwritten rules of Southern society. 3 days later, after enough recovery to stand and walk with assistance, Edmund left Beaufort. He carried nothing but the clothes on his back and the small sum of money the court had allowed him from the sale of his possessions. Willowbrook Plantation was sold at auction to pay off debts. Enslaved people, including Marcus's wife Rachel, were sold to various buyers across the region. The house itself was purchased by a Charleston family, who renamed it and attempted to erase any connection to the Harrove name. Edmund disappeared into the vastness of America. Some said he went to Texas. Others claimed he died within the year, unable to survive without the privilege and protection he had always known. A few whispered he had joined the California gold rush, lost among thousands of men fleeing their pasts. No one knew for certain. Edmund Hargrove had ceased to exist, as thoroughly as if he had been executed alongside Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel. Catherine returned to Charleston as she had planned. She resumed her maiden name, Pitton, and told everyone her husband had died. In a sense, it was true the man she had married no longer existed. Her family welcomed her back, sympathetic to her ordeal, recognizing her as the innocent victim of a monstrous deception. She never remarried. She lived quietly, managing her inheritance, attending church, maintaining the appearance of a respectable widow. But those who knew her noticed something had changed in her eyes, something hard, cold, and unyielding that had not been there before. She had destroyed her husband completely, and perhaps something within herself as well. Years passed. The scandal of Willowbrook Plantation faded from memory, though it remained a cautionary tale whispered to young men about the consequences of unnatural vice. County documents were sealed, as Judge Middleton had ordered, to protect the reputations of the families involved. In 1897, 54 years later, an unexpected event occurred. A young historian, Thomas Bradford, researching antebellum South Carolina for his doctoral thesis, applied for access to the sealed county records. After considerable debate, the judge granted permission, reasoning that enough time had passed, all directly involved were long dead, and history deserved the truth. Bradford spent 3 months examining documents, trial transcripts, Catherine's testimony, letters between the judge and officials, eyewitness accounts of the punishments and executions, medical reports on Edmund's condition, and financial records of the plantation sale. Everything had been meticulously preserved. He was shocked, not just by the events themselves, though they were disturbing enough, but by what the documents revealed about antebellum society, rigid moral codes, enforced through spectacular public violence, laws that made no distinction between willing participants and enslaved people with no choice, communities eager to witness suffering and participate in the destruction of one of their own when social order was threatened. Bradford published his findings in 1899 in a small academic journal. The article caused minor controversy among historians, but was largely ignored by the general public. The story was too old, too disturbing, too incompatible with the romantic myths of the Old South emerging at the time. Then, in 1923, 80 years after the scandal, Beaufort County opened the sealed documents to the public. A local newspaper ran a brief article on the Hargrove case, presenting it as a curious historical footnote. It mentioned that Catherine Pitton had lived until 1923, dying at 87 in Charleston, that Edmund Hargrove's ultimate fate remained unknown, and that descendants of Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel's families still lived in the region, most never fully aware of how their ancestors had died. The article concluded with a conventional moral: times were different, standards of justice had changed, and we could be grateful to live in a more enlightened era. But was it really so different? Laws had changed. Public executions no longer occurred. Torture was illegal. Yet human capacity for cruelty in the service of maintaining social order, for using law to destroy those who threatened hierarchies, for creating scapegoats and demanding blood sacrifices to appease collective fear and rage, had any of that truly changed? In 2015, a small historical society in Beaufort erected a marker near the site where the gallows had stood in 1843. The marker acknowledged that 3 enslaved men, Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel, last names unknown, had been executed there for crimes they could not have refused to commit. The marker called it injustice. It called it tragedy. It called it a reminder of laws and social systems that valued property over human dignity. It said nothing about Edmund Hargrove, nothing about Catherine, nothing about the 3 days in the pillory or the 60 lashes that left permanent scars. That part of the story remained too uncomfortable, too complex, too resistant to simple moral lessons about past wrongs. Edmund was both perpetrator and victim. He had wielded his power to coerce enslaved men into sexual acts, making him an abuser regardless of his own desires. And yet he had also been destroyed by a society that gave him no space to exist as he truly was, forcing him to hide, to lie, to create secret rooms where he could be authentic for a few stolen hours. Catherine, too, was both victim and perpetrator. She had been genuinely wronged, trapped in a loveless marriage, subjected to years of humiliation and judgment. But she had also orchestrated punishment of extraordinary cruelty, ensuring not only Edmund's physical destruction, but his psychological and spiritual annihilation. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were the purest victims. They had no choices, no power, no voice. They had been used and then executed to maintain a social order they had no role in creating. Their deaths were legal murder, sanctioned by courts, witnessed by hundreds who convinced themselves they were upholding justice and morality. 347 citizens who gathered in Beaufort Town Square over 3 August days in 1843. They brought their families to witness. They jeered, threw objects, called it righteousness. What were they? Monsters. Or ordinary people taught to believe that maintaining social order required spectacular violence, that some lives were worth less than others, that public suffering served a higher purpose. These questions have no easy answers. History rarely does. What happened at Willowbrook Plantation and in Beaufort Town Square was not an aberration. It was the logical extension of laws and social systems that existed throughout the antebellum South, throughout America, and throughout human societies built on hierarchies of power, enforced through violence. This story is disturbing, not because it is so different from our world, but because it reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature, how quickly compassion can vanish when we are told cruelty serves justice, how easily we convince ourselves that destroying others protects our own safety and virtue. Edmund Harrove, Catherine Petton, Marcus, Samuel, Daniel, Judge Middleton, Sheriff Denore, Reverend Cartwright, and the 347 witnesses gone now. Their world is gone. But the echoes of their choices, the violence they perpetrated, witnessed, or endured remain. Listen carefully, and you can still hear them. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything has been revealed, or are there still secrets buried in Beaufort's past? If you found this dark chapter of American history compelling and want more forgotten tales, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear. Hit the notification bell and share with someone who loves historical mysteries. Join us next time as we uncover another hidden nightmare from America's past.